question I want to ask you is this. Are the users getting the level of quality industry can provide, the technology and the expertise can provide, so that there's optimum balance between the quality and the resources employed by the service providers? I have worked for a service provider. I worked for the European Commission on some projects. I worked for the user groups, and I worked for standards bodies in my consultancy service after retirement. And my answer is, it can be optimized. There's room for improvement. The management of quality of service can be more professionally managed, and there are many edges where improvement can be made, which will result in improvement for the quality of life for the user and better prospects for the service provider. At the moment, the standards bodies are in a bit of a mix. They are providing a mix of professional services, professional standards. For some services, standards are produced on an efficient basis, for some on a semi-professional basis, and on some on an ad hoc basis. I want to put forward the case that with more professional management, the users can benefit. Now, how do we go about this? Let's start with quality. What do we understand by quality and quality of service? Back in the 1990s, the definition of quality was the totality of characteristics that an entity bears ability to satisfy stated and implied needs. That was an IOSA definition in the 1990s, which was made obsolete but resurrected by ITUT recommendation E800. That is the definition of quality now. However, the ISO superseded that 8402 by ISO 9000, and it says the definition of quality is degree to which a set of inherent characteristics fulfills requirements. Now, that cannot be used to define quality. Why? Take a product, diamond. The quality of diamond is defined by cut, color, clarity, and weight. These four parameters define the quality of diamond. And you take a piece of diamond, and anywhere in the world, throughout the world, in any shop, they'll say those characteristics or parameters are the same. It's unambiguous, it's definite. Using the definition of ISO 9000, you cannot define the quality of diamond. The ISO 9000 definition of quality refers more to the delivery of quality rather than the absolute quality. This distinction must be made, must be understood by the engineers and the industry. What is quality per se, and how do you deliver quality? ISO 9000 is more suited for the delivery of quality. Now, this absolute definition of quality can be used, and in fact is used to define the quality of service, which is again given in E800, totality of characteristics of a telecommunication service that bear its ability to satisfy stated and implied needs of the users of the service. It's a generic definition, but it's very clear and it's unambiguous. Some of you may recognize this, but I'll tell you the history of it later. There are four viewpoints of quality of service. Quality of service offered by the provider is what is used for forming SLAs and thus for planning purposes. On any service, they define a set of parameters, whether it is voice or IP or IPTV or plain old telephony or whatever the service is. They arrive at a list of parameters for the technical parameters and non-technical parameters, and then enter into an SLA agreement with the user and say, this is what we'll provide, this is what we hope to provide, and if you do not meet the targets, then there is escalation procedures for compensation schemes, etc. the fact that they plan to offer a level of service doesn't mean that they're going to achieve it. So you have to measure the actual achieved levels of service, and that is what is used by the regulator and the users to assess whether the service provider has delivered the quality or not. This is the customer's perception, sometimes also used as known as the QoE. Customer's perception is both subjective and to some extent objective. They can be influenced by what the customer thinks of the company, what the personal experience has been of this particular company or service, and various other factors, the ambient conditions under which the service is being used. So this has got a subjective element. To give you an example, back in the 90s, in the UK, people thought, a large number of people thought for 10 pennies, the number of seconds they got on a payphone was so many seconds. But in fact, it was about 4 times that. So BT carried out a massive advertising program through press, TV, and radio, and told the people, we in fact get 45 seconds or whatever. And that changed the perception of the customers. So before a service provider spends money on improving the service, they go to find out the customer perception of a particular service, measured by opinion scores, analyze it, and strip the objective and the subjective factors. I find out what really is causing the dissatisfaction before they're spending the money. And the fourth one is the customer's requirements. This is what is used for planning a new service. IPTV is fairly new, and we have a fair amount of information on mean opinion scores on voice, data, but for a combined mix of services like voice, data, graphics, audio, all in a IPTV, people aren't entirely sure how the individual responses combine together to form an overall perception. So there's a lot of work being done in that area, and this is where the information received in customer surveys and research work will form what the service provider will be able to offer the customers and to provide and to plan the service. These 4 definitions, these 4 viewpoints are adequate to cover all aspects of quality of service. And it is important that this is used by the industry. If you look at the academia, if you look at the papers published on quality of service in the academic world and even among the industry professionals, different people have got different interpretations on what quality of service is. And that is unfortunate, because all the possible synergy that we could benefit from by the combined effort of different research workers is not there, because everyone uses their own set of definition on what quality of service is. For example, in FITCE, if you type in quality of service, you'll find there are around 45 definitions on what quality QoS is. It's not necessary to have 45 definitions on quality of service by standards bodies. With that in mind, ITUT have gone for this, which is from G1000, ITUT recommendation G1000. And the history of this is, in 1991 to 1993, FITCE commissioned a study commission on customer, I forget the precise title, but something to do with customer requirements, quality of service requirements of the customer, and network performance. This framework was developed in that study. A few years later, it was input into the FITCE, and 10 years later, it was input into the ITUT, and it's become a recommendation. So there is a link between FITCE and this framework. So the first recommendation I want to suggest is harmonization of terms and definitions on quality of service. At the moment, as I said earlier, the term quality and quality of service have got different interpretations, different understandings. And even in our own conference, you find different people have got different emphasis on what QoS is. Please stick to the ITUT framework. When you carry out research work, want to explain, manage QoS, if you abide by the framework, the terms and definitions as in ITUT recommendations, there will be far more synergy, and the effort that you go into solving the problem will all fit together much better. So that's the first recommendation I would put forward, that harmonization of terms and definitions on QoS. QoE is a topic where there's a lot of work being done at the moment. It's a hot topic, all because of IPTV, particularly from IPTV and also other streaming services. In the viewpoint, 4 viewpoints, this customer's perception of QoS, that, in my opinion, could be redefined more clearly so that that coincides with the QoE. For all practical purposes, this is QoE. So for future work on QoE, if that framework defines that fourth one, the quality of service experience perceived by the customer as the same as QoE, then if all the future recommendations can embrace that concept and fit together, then that will go a long way. It will remove any ambiguities and make life easier for the research workers. Having agreed on a set of definitions, a common set of definitions, terms and definitions, the next thing that the standards bodies could do to improve the quality of service for the customers is to have, for all the main services at least, a set of QoS parameters defined, how to measure them, and how to present the results, so that when they carry out this, the results are comparable by the users. They can compare the performance of one service provider against another. There are 2 schools of thought. In UK, Ireland, and some other countries, they say, well, leave it to the market forces. Leave the market forces and establish a dynamic equilibrium whereby the customers and the service providers are reasonably happy with the level of quality of service offered. The other school of thought is, no, countries like Poland and Italy, I think, at least at one time, they specify the parameters and specify the level of performance to be achieved. They said, you must reach this target. I'm not going to recommend one or the other, but what I do recommend is that a set of terms and a set of parameters be defined for the main services, how they are to be measured, and how the results are to be published, so that the customers can decide. Don't make it mandatory for them to meet targets. Leave that to the local regulator, but let the customers decide. This is the level of performance offered by service provider A. This one is by B. And they can decide for themselves which suits their requirements best. Guidelines could be provided to the service providers on how to choose the parameters. The FITCE have produced a document recently where 86 parameters have been defined, 86 generic parameters have been defined for ICT services, starting from information on the services, contractual stages, repair, customer relationship stages, operator services, charging, billing, network service interaction by the customer, etc. Now, it's not necessary and it will be impossible to take all 86 parameters and incorporate them for service providers to report delivered quality on. The idea is that make a selection from each of those categories, charging, repair services, whatever it is, the 11 categories, take a selection of them. The local regulator can decide which of these are important for the local population and recommend that the service providers whose turnover, whose customer population is more than 5% of the total population are obliged to to report delivered quality on, or whatever. Leave that to the local regulator. But make this provision that their results are comparable, and for them to be comparable, the QoS parameters are got to be defined unambiguously. It's got to be accepted worldwide, and part of this ITU work, FITCE work, has been input into the ITUT, and is at the moment being considered by Study Group 12. And there's a strong possibility that in the next meeting in November that it will be adopted, which means we will have, after November, if it is adopted, a set of generic QoS parameters which can be used for the main ICT services to report delivered quality on. I don't agree that I've had fights with Ofcom in the UK and Oftel previous to that, their view is, well, leave it to the market forces. If the customers are happy, why bother? Well, I can see the logic of that, but it is not, that doesn't optimize the quality of life as enjoyed by the customers with the technology that can offer, what the technology can offer in terms of quality. There's an obligation by the regulator to ensure that the customers get as good a quality the technology can offer, so that both the service provider and the user are happy. The way they can be happy is if the average revenue per user is optimized. And the way to optimize that is to find out what the quality of service requirements are by the users, for the service provider to optimize their network and non-financial and other human resources in a manner where there's maximum ARPU, and carry out investments in a manner whereby this relationship is optimized. That way, both service providers and the users improve their own quality of life. At the moment, it's a mix. Some services are managed professionally, more professionally than others. Some of them are on an ad hoc basis, and some of them are not managed at all. So there is room for improvement. And the way to improve is to, first of all, to use standard terms and definitions. Secondly, to use a set of comparable terms and parameters on which to report delivered quality on. How do you identify QoS parameters for new services? A good example is the IPTV. ITUT carried out a focus group. I think it lasted for about 9 to 12 months. And the report is about 715 pages. It can be downloaded from our ITUT website. It's a good report, gone into detailed requirements of a wide segment of the population, the day-to-day users, the industry users, and found out what they really want, how the different criteria affect different segments of the population. And based on that findings of the report, we are trying to define a set of parameters for IPTV. That's one way. Another way is to have cooperative work with other service providers. Euroscom is a good example, where different service providers can work together for the common good to identify for new services what are the QoS parameters likely to be, and that make progress on that. And that information can be distilled into the standards fora, and they can form standards, formulate terms and definitions, and methods of measurement, and methods of presenting the results. Some areas, especially in Africa, there's the regional needs. They've got more of legacy networks, and because of that, some of the more sophisticated QoS parameters are not applicable there, but there's a need, and QSDG, which is a subset of ITT, are meeting that requirement. And that's another way to meet the local needs without forming a breakaway section. Attendance in standards fora is another aspect. Because of the world situation, financial situation, there's a cutback in the attendance on the standards fora. I think people should be educated to spend more quality time by the staff and input into the standards forum for the benefit of both the service providers and the users. The regulators' role, they have a duty to educate the public, where the public are not as informed as they should be because of the advances in technology, so that they can realistically expect what quality of service can be expected because of the potential of the technology. And that's the role which the regulators could undertake. Input from the user groups. INTUG, most European countries have got user groups in telecoms as a good source to get specialized requirements, and if there are material for formulating standards, input that into the standards for HC or even better, the ITUT, and that can form standards. And ITUT can take the role of a standards coordinator. There is, at the moment, too much fuzzy work. Somebody comes up with a good idea that becomes standardized. Another person comes with a similar idea, slightly different. They get standardized. If they could take the role of ensuring that they fit together, ask them to do some fine tuning, not have any fundamental change in the way of thinking, but to fine tune, make sure they are fit together. And if they fit together in that 4 viewpoints, then so much the better. So that's a summary. Identification of the key issues of the customer's QoS concerns, ensure the standards are available at the right time, education of the customers, encouraging service providers to report delivered quality, and harmonization. And if there's one thing you can take away from this presentation, it is this: the need for harmonization of the terms and definitions. At the moment, there are far too many definitions and concepts, too much of a fuzzy understanding on what the terms of quality and quality of service. If they can grasp the meaning of quality and the 4 viewpoints, and try to encourage the use of that in your own work and in the further research work, that would be a good start. Thank you for your attention.